The Swanburne Academy proudly presents Great Orations of Nutsawoo, a squirrel's guide to rhetoric. Talking is something that most of us do every day. But when we use words skillfully to persuade our listeners, that's a special kind of talking. It's called rhetoric. Think of all that persuasive words can accomplish. They can open people's hearts against injustice and topple tyrants. They can inspire a team to win. They can give hope to those who are suffering. Persuasive words can also be used for less Swanburnian motives. They can convince people to believe lies. They can turn neighbors against each other. They can make peaceful people want to go to war. You don't have to be a lawyer, a politician, or a general to use the techniques of rhetoric. Every time a parent tries to persuade a child to eat her vegetables, every time a kid tries to persuade another kid to share a toy, that's rhetoric at work. The History of Rhetoric. The art of persuasive speech has been studied and taught for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians wrote about the principles of fine speech as early as 2200 BC. The Chinese philosopher Confucius also wrote about rhetoric and the importance of not misusing persuasive speech to spread lies. Ancient Greece was obsessed with rhetoric. This was because Athens was ruled by an assembly of citizens, an early form of democracy. Knowing how to give a compelling speech in the assembly was so important, schools were formed just to teach rhetoric. The Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote a book called The Art of Rhetoric. The influence of his ideas has lasted for centuries. Aristotle thought of rhetoric as a practical skill, a set of techniques that anybody could learn and use. He described 3 powerful ways to persuade an audience: ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos has to do with the speaker's qualifications. Is she an expert on her subject? Is she someone the audience can trust and relate to? Logos is when the speaker makes a factual argument, one that appeals to reason, logic, or the intellect. Pathos is when a speaker tries to stir up the emotions of the crowd. Aristotle warned against the misuse of pathos, especially when it came to negative or violent emotions. He thought the tools of rhetoric should be used to help citizens understand the truth, not turn them into a mob. One of the great minds of ancient Rome, Cicero, also had a huge impact on the study of rhetoric. Cicero lived a few centuries after Aristotle, but he was deeply influenced by Aristotle's ideas. Cicero wrote many books about how words could be used to persuade and inspire. He's still considered one of the greatest speakers of all time. Even so, Cicero was very nervous before speaking in public. He got over his stage fright by studying acting. The Rhetoric of Nutsawoo. Even a squirrel can use the techniques of rhetoric developed by Aristotle and Cicero. In fact, one of the greatest orations in squirrel history uses a dozen different tools of rhetoric in one speech. Before Nutsawoo gives his speech, let's learn the techniques of rhetoric used by that persuasive furry-tailed scamp. Epizeuxis means using the same word several times in a row. Eroticis is when you ask a question that's not meant to be answered. This is also known as a rhetorical question. Antithesis is the use of contrast or opposites. Tricolon means using 3 different phrases in a row that increase in length. Paramologia is when you admit that your opponent has a point. Enargia means to paint a mental picture of something with descriptive words. Occulatio is when you list all the things you're not going to say. Apostrophe is when you switch from speaking to the audience and address a particular person or idea. Syntheton is a phrase made of 2 words joined by a conjunction, like and. Anamnesis means to recall past events or sayings. Argumentum ad populum is when the speaker appeals to the authority of the crowd. When a person says things like, "Everyone thinks so," or "Everyone agrees," to try to prove his point, that's argumentum ad populum. Anaphora is a repeated word or phrase that occurs at the beginning of a sentence. Finally, there's chiasmus. Chiasmus means using 4 words or phrases in a crisscross pattern of A, B, B, A. It's tricky to explain, but you'll recognize chiasmus when you hear it. Here's a famous example of chiasmus from a speech by President John F. Kennedy. "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Here's another example of chiasmus from Agatha Swanburne. "Idle minds and busy hands have knitted many a sweater. Idle hands and busy minds have knitted many a brow." Now that you've been introduced to these tools of rhetoric, let's hear how Nutsawoo used all of them to make one very persuasive speech. Great Orations of Squirreldom by Nutsawoo, given in protest of the gardener.
Acorns, acorns, acorns. Do you think that's all squirrels care about? The mighty oak and its tasty seeds? Not so. Today I come to speak to you not of the oak, but of the elm. I scamper, I chatter, I wring my tiny paws in dismay, for the gardener wants to prune the great branch of the elm. I ask you, what good is an elm tree with no branch to build a nest in? I admit, the branch is rather close to the nursery window. In a strong wind, it's been known to nearly touch the glass. But has a window ever been broken? Has any living creature ever been harmed by this elm? No. Now imagine the perfect coziness of a nest in the branches. A treetop paradise, woven of twigs and leaves and grass. Imagine the delight of the human children inside the house to watch my family's antics close up. As for humans, I will not speak of the gardener. There's no need to mention how this menace to plants has been caught napping in the tulip beds, how he overpruned the rose bushes to a mere stump. And it would be totally rude of me to mention his grass-stained overalls, his dull pruning shears, and his, oh gardener, you know it's true, his disorganized collection of seeds. No, it's not a squirrel's place to say these things. I will speak only of what I know best. When it comes to acorns, I say find and bury. And when it comes to elm trees, I say, grow and prosper. As the wise squirrel said, what's good for the treetops is good for the squirrel. All the squirrels and all the birds and even all the chipmunks will tell you the same thing. This mighty elm has stood for centuries. This mighty elm has roots. This mighty elm is mighty nice. Hear me. Those who would chop and saw, think of my nest and my little ones. Leave my branch alone. This tree may shade your family home, but it's home for my family tree.